And today we are going to be looking at who are the winners and losers in innovative finance and higher education, and specifically looking at a case in Kenya, which our two esteemed presenters will be sharing some more information with us. Hopefully for those who are in the room, it can spark some debate. For those of you who are listening to the recorded session, you are welcome to also reach out to our team if you'd like some more information. So I want to introduce our two speakers, and then I'm going to hand over to them because they really are the stars of the show and have got the very interesting content that they're going to share with you. So first of all, to welcome Dr. Phumlani Nkontwana. He is the director of the Allan Centre for African Entrepreneurship based at Stellenbosch University, and we are very fortunate he is also a member of our research team that is looking at the evaluation of innovative finance instruments. We are specifically looking at in Africa, but we are part of a research team that is working internationally and looking at cases in South Asia as well. And Phumlani is joined by Allan, who is a data scientist extraordinaire, a very valid or valuable member of our team. And we're so happy to have the two of them who are going to be sharing with us today based on some work that they've done, looking at what happens to people who are trying to access higher education financing, particularly in a case in Kenya, for those who are actually intended to be selected, and what actually happens in the real world. So we're going to be hearing from the two of them. So I'm going to hand over to Allan and Phumlani to take us through the presentation. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Wendy. People are welcome to show their faces if they want. It makes it easy always when you present. So we will do this interchangeably. So Allan will take you through the first slides, which basically would be we've done the introduction already, will be the systemic literature review. And we've looked at to try and understand the financing landscape for higher education in Africa. And we'll look at that, and then we have a practical case study, which is the LEAP project. We'll describe that project that we recently went to Kenya in Nairobi to collect more data for another summative study, which hopefully you can also present in this platform. But we will be presenting the selection bit of that study, looking at the demographics and some of the developmental questions, really, at the end of the day, who becomes the winner and loser in what we call innovative finance in higher education. And we'll take questions and answers. So maybe Allan, then you can start the next few slides.
So I trust you can see my screen and also hear me very well. Perfect. So before embarking on looking at the Kenyan case, the LEAP case, we wanted to do some systematic literature review to understand some of the factors that influence the likelihood of being selected into a tertiary education lending schemes in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And a few background before we dig deeper into that. We all know, and most of you are very vast and understand the limited and inequitable loan distribution in Africa. We know that low-income households are less likely to be selected or to receive student loans. And women are also less likely to receive students' loans compared to their male counterparts. And also students coming from rural areas are also less likely to receive student loans. And there are other compounding factors that stems from not only the candidates themselves, but rather the system itself, looking at from a government perspective or private financials perspective, and we're going to look into that. So the overall objective of this systematic review was to examine these challenges in details. And as I mentioned earlier on, looking at different perspectives. So for example, you wanted to understand from a student's perspective, what are some of these limitations that they are, or challenges that they are facing also from a private financial perspective and from a public financial perspective. We mainly also wanted to look at private financial perspective, since most of these innovative financing schemes are a combination of both private and public partnership, and it would have been important to look into that as well. So we used a systematic literature review, and we started with actually 28,000 articles, and we scanned them and mainly looking for articles that are coming from sub-Saharan Africa and mainly focusing on student loans and not grants. And we ended up with 23,000 articles coming from Google Scholar and 4,000 coming from JSTOR. And out of these articles, we ended up with 72 articles that were analyzed. And we are mainly removing duplicates and prioritizing on low-income countries. Let me skip this slide, as it is a repetition of the systematic literature review. So in terms of what you are seeing from the 72 articles that we analyzed, first of all, there were 49 journals, and most of them were from higher education journal. If you look at the slide, the panel with journals at 11%, and then followed by American Economic Journal, and then Journal of Labor Economics. And we really struggled to find articles from Sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, 44% of these articles were published within North American region. And the financing mechanism was mainly student loan at 35%. And the year of publication ranged between 1972 and 2020. And majority of these articles were quantitative in nature, with at 64%, followed by qualitative articles at 32%, then 4% mixed methods. At this juncture, I would like to invite Phumlani to take us through the findings that we are seeing from different perspectives. We looked at 3 dimensions, and he'll take us from there.
Well, I'm sorry about my lighting today. So we basically, you know, in a way, we found a triad of insights relating to private financiers, basically commercial banks, credit unions, private lending firms, etc., and some other non-government organizations. And on the public side, looking at some of the issues and perspectives from the public financiers and students. And the idea essentially, which is really the approach at Bertha Centre, is to take a systems approach. And it's also an approach that I like as a researcher, because we've seen a lot of studies that focus only on the demand side and not on the supply side. We can go to the next slide. So essentially, I won't bore you with the list of this, because we try to visualize these findings as best as we can. But it's it's safe to say it's the usual suspects in higher education that you experience in Africa, where you've got limited student loan options, and there's massive financial illiteracy that students have around these loans, that essentially doesn't empower them. And also, even when they've consumed these loans, it's inequitable, which is what Allan alluded to earlier in terms of gender and all of these things. And along with the classical stringent eligibility criteria, which privileges usually those that have assets. So that's the student side of things. From the private financiers, it's always also the usual sort of issues, and looking for complaints around lack of credit history and collateral in students in Africa, which are already assetless. But of course, it's which is the same as what you see in SME finance, where the supply side complains about credit history and all of that. And there's, of course, especially when it comes to blended finance and all these new innovative finance instruments, there's still quite weak regulation and legal frameworks, and essentially just poor institutionalization when it comes to private finances. And all of these things, for example, the lack of credit history, high default rates, means ultimately that you have high operating costs and high financing costs. On the public side, it's also some of the usual suspects, like poor management of loan systems. We know we have experience in different parts of Africa of the same complaints, and of course, there's always more demand than the supply in these government-led schemes. And that is coupled by this revolving fund paradox, which, is always complex because, the model is built around students being able to pay so that the fund can revolve, but they don't obviously pay. So the fund doesn't grow, or is always kind of unstable and underfunded. I mean, the rest, I think you guys know that very well. Yeah, so that's the landscape analysis that, just like any literature review exercise, ultimately the goal is to develop a conceptual framework, or what I like to call a pair of glasses, to be able to look at case studies. So that's, if you like, for us, the pair of glasses that we are wearing, which we are then applying to a real case that the innovative finance team at UCT, which Allan and I are part of, is studying at the moment in the next couple of years. So Allan, I'll let you present the case, and then we'll also go into some of the results of this case study outside the literature review that we've done. I see Gillian has joined. Welcome, Gillian, and thank you for taking your afternoon. I imagine everyone has stopped working because it's a holiday and people are already on leave today to enjoy the long holiday. So very welcome.
Thank you, Phumlani. So with the LEAP case study, there are several research questions you wanted to answer. First of all, you wanted to understand the correlation between some of the selection covariates that are being used and the outcome of being selected into the fellowship program. And another research question, we wanted to understand what are these selection variables that have the strongest correlation with the outcome of being selected, and generate some insights on recommendation we can make to the LEAP fellowship program. And before I continue, I'd like maybe to give an overview of LEAP. I'm not sure if we have already introduced how LEAP works and the finance mechanism that they have implemented, innovative financing mechanism that they have implemented. Phumlani, would you like to speak on this?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that obviously, as we've just presented now in the first couple of slides, was what does the financing landscape, higher education financing landscape look like? And essentially for us, as an innovative finance team, we're interested to know what is the innovation there, what are the blended finance instruments, and LEAP is one of those. And I mean, Allan, you can introduce it yourself since it's in your vicinity in Kenya.
Thank you, Phumlani. So LEAP is a social lending scheme in Kenya, particularly in East Africa. The objective is to reach across all East African countries. And it takes an innovative financing approach. Unlike the HELB, which is the government-led lending scheme, LEAP provides some intervention that really helps their fellows to, first of all, graduate and then get job placement and repay back the loan. So there are some intervention that they have done. For example, training their LEAP fellows to, for example, financial literacy and improving their grades, finding ways of training them on how to get good jobs, and even going ahead and providing them opportunity of job market, linking them directly to companies that provide employment. And this really helps with repayment threats, and also it really helps with the revolving fund that the next generation of student will be able to access it. Other advantages that they provide is low interest rates, and they also provide flexible repayment period. So in this study, we are analyzing 4 cohorts of fellows spanning 5 years. So it's a very huge data set, very clean data set, and a data set that we can draw insights from. And we utilize the classical methods of analyzing this data, starting with univariate analysis, looked at bivariate analysis to look at independent variables that have likelihood of a selection into the LEAP program, and also in order to identify the leading variables in terms of likelihood of being selected. We also did multivariate analysis just to make sure that we adjust for any confounding factors or any variables that were correlated. So in terms of findings, first of all, before you go through the findings, as I mentioned earlier on, we had 4 cohorts of data, and majority of these candidates were coming from cohort 4 at 44%, and minority from cohort 2 and 3. The cohort 2 and 3 spanned during the COVID pandemic period. And then what is the overall acceptance rate? The overall acceptance rate is 44%. And this is the reason why it's very high. They do targeted recruitment. So the LEAP doesn't go for any student, but they focus on certain courses and certain cohort of students. And that's why the acceptance rate is quite high. And there was some variability in terms of cohort. And for example, in cohort 1, we had the lowest acceptance rate at 24%, followed by cohort 3 at cohort 4 at 49%, and then cohort 3 at 58%, and cohort 2 at 67%. And you might be curious why cohort 2 and 3 had the highest acceptance rate, mainly because of the COVID pandemic. First of all, we had very few of the candidates applying to that program, and that resulted in high selection or acceptance rate. So I'd like to invite Phumlani to take us through the findings that we are seeing, starting with the bivariate analysis.
Yeah, we've titled this discussion Winners and Losers, who are basically the winners and losers in the innovative finance using this LEAP case study, which has got huge data sets over the last couple of years. And that's just a provocative topic to look at. If we were to do innovative finance in higher education, what is likely to happen from a selection point of view? And so if you look at these findings here, overall, we're talking about over 2,000 candidates with 44% acceptance rate, which means it's quite competitive, or there's limited funds, etc. And the mean age, it's still very young people, which is why the supply side and why the innovation in the financial architecture is really important, because it seems that the lenses through which applications are seen or loans are dispersed still follows the classical finance architecture, which is, not built on losing. If we give you the money, we need to make sure that you get back that money. There must be collateral. You must have low default rates, good credit history, etc., which in essence doesn't really work for young people with this. Just also to say that this is, I think the median age in Africa is 19. So this is very much the fabric of society, so to speak, that are looking for higher education finance. And then disabilities, 6% of those that were accepted, about 67% or 68% had below poverty incomes. Huge majority of the applicants were single, and of those that were selected. And then there was also a good group that had basically majority had no children, but there was people with children that were accepted. From a gender lens, those who were selected were predominantly males, about 71%, which again speaks to what we already found in the literature scan. And the ones that were selected as well, majority of them, as you saw, had quite low incomes. As you can see, it's like 0 to 20, over 50% had incomes that are less than 20 Kenyan shillings. Other economic characteristics, that may be interesting or not, but we can explain why we thought these were interesting, is that 93% had a mobile money account, and 26% were employed in the last 3 years. We can go to the next slide. So as we mentioned before, we look at that kind of univariate analysis that I just did, now looking at some of these variables independently, and then this is the bivariate analysis. So basically looking at these demographic variables on the left against whether you get selected or not, demographics and economic characteristics. And here essentially the key thing to note is that age didn't matter, probably because already the majority were fairly young. With the median age, as I mentioned, of 22. So that wasn't really a criteria for getting this funding. Again, also being single, because the bulk of the data sets were single people, as you would expect for people who are 22 years old in East Africa. And also having children as well wasn't a factor, because majority were not. And then, of course, the other things that you see highlighted in bold basically means that it was significant, that was part of the selection. So when you look at this, essentially what it tells you is that you could say from this slide that this is good, because there's no age discrimination, and there's no there's some people who are disabled that were selected. At least almost 80% of those who were disabled were selected, etc. So almost about 8% of those who were disabled were selected, and there were already very small data sets. So we can move on. So that picture basically says nothing to worry about for now. And then we look at, we went further and dig deep a little bit, looking at, okay, we get the social economic demographic, but what about the relationship between your high school history and where you are at tertiary, whether you're first year, second year? Does that matter in these loan schemes? And interestingly, again, there's some of the worrying issues here. One of the things that we look at is that your high school grade matters. And, you know, there's huge issues. This compounds exclusions. And of course, all loans, even the government's one, they still want this merit kind of thing, at least at this bivariate level. And we also noticed that it matters, the months until graduation matter. So essentially the observation here is that those who are selected seems to be further, you know, essentially seems to kind of, there's a, you know, it's like almost 16 or 17 months before graduation. What that means is that these are not necessarily pure first year students. And there's something there that to dig a little bit better. And you can verify that if you go down under the academics, you'll see that the majority that are given the scholarship, about 33%, are essentially those in second year. And this is worrying, and it's also quite pervasive, and even in general scholarships that are not that are grant type based and are not really business orientated, like a loan scheme. You find that first years are not supported because they are risky, you know, and they are likely to fail and change and whatever these issues. But yet, arguably, they're the ones that need the support the most. For example, in particular, for a scheme like this, which doesn't just give the funding, there's 3 other programs that they provide to support academics and the credit management of this, etc. So yeah, so that's that. And then prior and current loan financing characteristics. So essentially here we're looking at, okay, now we've seen the demographics, but what about your financial history? What's the relationship between your financial history? Even as young as 22-year-old as you may be, does that matter? And the short answer is yes, it matters quite a lot. For example, we noticed that those who had financial support before and approved bursaries were likely to be selected, which means they have a relationship with bursaries and financial support. You know, those who defaulted the loans defaulted on the loans, that was quite significant as well. It matters quite a lot whether you default on the loan or not. So and you could see that, you know, even though they still take you, but there's some sort of, and you'll see in the multivariate analysis that there's a lot of scrutiny on this. And then I think, yeah, Eva applied for LEAP. So the people applying again, seems that that also made a difference. And this is normal in scholarships and these loans, where you've learned and maybe you applied in the first year and you failed, and now and you apply again. So yeah, Allan, I think we can move to the next one. And so that concludes then the univariate and bivariate. So essentially looking at some of our own hunches and looking at what might be the relationships between demographics, your economic background, as well as your high school history. And then, as I said, the helicopter bird view on the data, which is quite a lot, is that, you know, in this scheme, there's some demographic things that are good, but there are some classical finance type behaviors from the supply side that are still concerning. So that's all I can say. And then we'll move on to the multivariates now, which is putting everything together and looking at, so the bivariate looks at each variable against the order of being selected. But it also, when you put them together and you aggregate all these variables, do they also affect each other in the totality of scheme? And that's what a multivariate analysis really is all about. I'll invite my colleague Allan to take you through this.
Thank you, Phumlani. So, sorry for this busy slide. Let's focus on the right panel where we have this visualization. And we used multivariate logistic regression. And we wanted to rank order all the factors that were very predictive of being selected into the LEAP fellowship program. And let me just briefly show you how to interpret this graphic. We have the x-axis is in log odds ratio. And that way we are able to see the negative log odds and positive log odds, or negative correlation or positive correlation. There is a line in the middle over here where we now tries to distinguish between the variables that are positively correlated versus negatively correlated. And any indicator or dot that is blue, that means it's significant. And any point and the confidence interval that is red, that is insignificant. And the wider the confidence interval, the wider the bar, means that that estimate has noise, and it's less. We rarely pay attention to such kind of estimates. And looking at this graphic, we saw that cohort of application was significantly associated, provided, the likelihood of being selected was affected by cohort of application, and mainly because pandemic played made some effect on these cohorts. For example, cohort 4 and 3 are out of the pandemic period, and that's why for some reason it was negatively correlated with being selected. Retaking units was negatively correlated with likelihood of being selected, and that makes sense. The fellowship program was mainly looking at those who are performant, meaning they were not retaking units. And interestingly, if you compare grade C or D to grade A, scoring grade C or D was negatively correlated compared to grade A, which makes sense since the program was mainly looking for those students who are performant in their education. And then also high school grade B was also negatively correlated compared to grade A, but it was less negatively correlated compared to grade D.
So you could be tolerated if you got a B instead if you didn't get an A, you could be tolerated. But the problem is this is quite a poor demographic, and we know that your income lingers with your academic performance. So we know this in Africa, and that's some of the developmental concerns about this, is that it just follows the classical financing loan approach on that aspect, as much as it embraces some of the other demographic issues.
Interestingly, thank you for that, Phumlani. Interestingly, having children was positively correlated with being selected, and maybe LEAP was trying to fund those students with already having burden with having children. And then if you have ever defaulted loan in your previous history, was negatively correlated with being selected, which is not surprising. And then, of course,
it's not surprising, but concerning. like having children is a good outcome, but no financial scheme wants someone who's defaulted before. But if you are poor, you are likely to default, because you're either unemployed or your mom is unemployed. So, but anyways, that's just to highlight these things, as Allan says, makes sense. It makes business sense, but is it a developmental outcome we want?
And then lastly, academic year was actually all of them were significant. And we could see that academic year 2 and 3 were the one who were most likely to be selected, and then followed by academic year 5 or 6. And there are some students who are at academic 5 and 6 mainly because they are doing health sciences courses which takes, or engineering courses which takes 6 years. And if you are in academic year 4 and academic year 1, you are less likely to be funded compared to the other academic years. I don't know if there is anything interesting that we would like to highlight, Phumlani, especially for those non-significant factors.
No, that's fine. I think we can move on. Yeah.
So because of time, I'd like to stop. We would like to stop here and get your reflection and looking at some of the emerging insights that we are seeing and whether this makes sense from your perspective, and also a chance for questions from this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen your question, Wendy, and it's a good question. It's always those. That's one of the things. I'm an economist, but I'm like I have a problem with my field in that sense, because it's quite documented actually that students from private high schools, or at least even Model Cs, they perform better at university. And there's been massive studies done looking at throughput rates, things like that, against demographics. But the problem is that the reason, or is that the symptom, or is that the outcome? Because if you from a poor high school, you actually just don't know how to navigate a university system culturally, like you get to res and things like that. So what you find with previously disadvantaged learners, that they adjust from second year, which is why you see the second year financing phenomenon from second or third year, where because they've learned how the system works. Like, for example, one of my friends at varsity said, we're staying at Kopano at UCT, basically told me this is exactly like boarding school. Whereas for us, we're still overwhelmed with all of this. And so I think it's one of those situations where statistically, yes, but it's a question of, do you want to change the status quo, or do you want to change the system or not? And that's some of these dynamics that these innovative financing schemes need to deal with. They need to be prudent, of course, with a viable business model. But what is blended finance then if it's not risk liking a little bit and not doing something unique? You can go ahead, Wendy.
And it's actually it's Lauren, not Wendy. I don't know how we got the same names on the little bit weird, but
for
Lauren,
some reason it's a bit creepy. Thanks for raising that, Phumlani. That the first gen issue is exactly what I was hitting on there, and I think especially in Kenyan context is like there's also massive urban, rural, cultural vibes that we need to talk about, and how in Kenya most high schools are actually boarding school, and if you're a high performer in a Kenyan public school, it means you most likely are coming from one of the top boarding schools. Now you go to university, you may not be guaranteed that same sort of support, and especially the discipline aspect is somehow missing. It's the city, and I guess, quite frankly, my thoughts are recently influenced by this documentary that's just recently released on Netflix called Free Money. This NGO Give Directly playing around with the universal basic income thing, and watching this person move from a village from Western Kenya down to Nairobi, and just it's another life that you're quite frankly not prepared for. And also fresh in my mind, because I am part of this project team, is an interview with someone from the LEAP Credit Committee on Monday, and strongly backing this, which didn't make sense to me. It seemed a bit lopsided, the preference, and then the data show very clearly that you need an A. Why not just say that straight up front? More than being financially needy, you need an A.
You need to be a super poor kid who's like 22, below poverty income, probably have a child, have defaulted a loan before, but don't mess with your A. Just don't mess with your results.
Exactly.
And that's the irony. It fulfills these scarce kid, these outliers. And they might look like there's a few hundreds of them, but in a country like Kenya with almost 60 million people, a few hundreds is very negligible. Is extremely negligible of these poor, super smart and super poor kids. And so that's for me is the reason why we titled this talk, Who Are the Winners and Losers? Let's just call it for what it is. Who's winning and who's losing? And for me, when I look at this data, and we've looked at it with Allan, the first one, and all this multiple years and multi-year one, is like, it's just signaling, it's very clear. It's a very particular archetype of a kid who must really be a superhero, so to speak. And the rest of the ordinary poor kids who are ordinary because of circumstances and geography and ecological propensities and all of that, those kids are losers. And that's what this data is showing us. As much as it's pro-poor, it's also pro those who are not gifted.
Mhm.
Right.
Or against those who are not gifted. It's pro-poor, but you're a loser if you're not gifted. And I think that's the thing that sickens me about higher education in Africa.
Maybe another question on the pro-poor thing, Allan, maybe this one is for you. I'm curious, how exactly poor is quantified, and I'm assuming there's some level of self-reporting, and what are the verifications beyond that? Because I think your point is very provocative, Phumlani. It's like, yeah, there's an I didn't think about it that way. There's an archetype. You're betting on you're betting on a horse that either doesn't exist, or with a cynic's view on does exist, but only hypothetically. And that's why so I'm curious, Allan, and maybe Phumlani too, from your experience of other sorts of programs like this, the verification process of wealth or income status as it relates to selection. That was kind of a broad, wobbly question, but I hope you got the gist.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. That's a very relevant question. First of all, looking at the distribution of these 2,290 candidates, 67% of them were living below poverty line. And the poverty line definition, we are using the World Bank definition, which is 1.9, defining as earning less than 1.9 per day in their household. That is roughly 272 Kenya shillings. And this is a huge number, 1,500 candidates out of 2,290 living below poverty line. And interestingly, out of that, 83% were selected versus 64% were not selected. But if you look at this data in multivariate settings, suddenly below poverty line becomes insignificant, signaling that poverty was not a huge factor, rather your academic standing or your academic year of application, or whether you're having children and so on. I don't know if there is anything to, Phumlani, feel free to add on this.
No, that's the power of multivariates that people don't sometimes appreciate, is that what we're saying here is that when all things are said and done, this is what summarizes LEAP selection, literally. So when all is said and done, it comes down to this. So, and here it's a very few things, and you could see high school grade. It's extremely significant. The academic year you're in is extremely significant. And whether you've defaulted on a loan. And just by the way, if you look at that ever defaulted on a loan, again, these things can be sometimes tricky to read, but you look at the odds ratio, that 0.93 means it's negatively correlated with being selected because the odds ratio are below 1. So ultimately, it just follows like a typical loan. It must be clean, not defaulted before. Ideally, again, you look at the retake units, 0.46. It's significant, but negatively. Don't fail as well. Don't just be a super smart, super poor kid, but also don't fail at university. And so that's really when all is said and done. And that's the beauty about doing both univariate, bivariate, as well as multivariate, is that because you go through a journey of what might appear like signaling, but actually on a Monday morning is not signaling. And ultimately, that's what multivariate does. And then that links to, I'm going to check with you if we've covered you there, Lauren, but it leads to the question you are, and the comment you are making, Wendy, that why then have the other support? My observation, being also this archetype of a kid, is that and I've seen this in other programs as well, just because you are super smart and you're an outlier doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to struggle, because the issue is culture and the system. You are cognitively smart, maybe you are a math brain or whatever, or like some sort of nerd or whatever these kids have as gifts or endowments, what we call in other studies, ecological endowments. Whatever your ecological endowments are, you will never be smart for a system you don't know. And if you want to prove this, you can even take it to sports. You take a kid who's a wonder kid from Argentina and you take them to Spain. They have to be incredibly disciplined. And the odds of them really doing well in that context is if they come very young. You can see this with people like your Lionel Messi, all these other stars. For them to pick up the discipline of that context, they needed to leave Argentina at 6 years of age. By the time they're conscious, they know that system. That's the only way. If you look at what happens with African, for example, sports stars, even in sports or other contexts, they leave Africa late and they get to America, they lack discipline. We can see this with your Benny McCarthy's. The complaint was always, you're not fit enough. You're not fit enough. because it's late. It's a late context. So, and this is true for any system. And we know this as well at Bertha. We study a lot of complex systems, and education is a complex system because it's overwhelming, and nobody talks about that. You know, that you are seeing now Mzungu for the first time standing in front of you, for example, and you must deal with that and still perform and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's just to echo what you are both saying and to say, to me, you will still have these super bright kids failing, of course, you know, even though they are outliers. And so they need as much psychological and other support as they can.
Thanks for that, Phumlani. I think that's useful to frame it like that. Just want to check if there's some other questions. Jill, I don't know if you have a question for the team.
No, education is not my area, but this was very, very sobering. Yeah, brings to bear a lot of the odds stacked up against people out there. Yeah. It would be nice. I don't know, is there potential to do something similar here?
Yes, yes, we have another study, another project, IBIF, and it was stopped here in South Africa, and we were hoping to explore an RCT between South Africa and Kenya and maybe India. But there's another replacement project, but sadly it won't be in South Africa. But when I look at this data, I can tell you now it won't be so different. Maybe it will be less demographically friendly in this super exclusionary South African country. But yeah, I mean, we would love to do if there was a study with a similar data set. But in my experience, I mean, I sit in some scholarship funds. This is the same. They run away from first years, they prefer second or third years. And the principle is let's not waste money, even if it's a philanthropic fund. So you lead by, we're helping, but on a Monday morning, your lenses are a very strict financial model that is built on de-risking and not venturing and not losing money.
Thanks for that rather sobering conclusion, Phumlani. Yeah, a little bit depressing for a long weekend as we start thinking about celebrating Heritage Day. But I think it's the fact that we're doing this, that this research is, you know, based on academically rigorous research methodologies, we can publish this and start actually putting out into the public domain what's happening, you know, backed by good research. And as I say, some of our star researchers like Phumlani and Allan who've been sharing with us today.
And this is a complete study, by the way, on its own. I was a little bit uncomfortable with the first one, which was looking at one data set. But this on its own, it is what it is. Whatever the treatment effects are, this is the selection story. And this one, you know, whatever we study else, whether it's the governance innovation behind this or whatever that happens at an outcomes level, it won't change the selection empirical finding. So I would say this is a study that, in my view, is ready to start looking for journals that would be interested in something like this, because it's longitudinal. It doesn't have to have a comparative edge.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Lauren, I don't know if I covered you before Wendy concludes with your question earlier, and if Allan and I covered you well, and if Allan wants to also say his concluding.
Yeah, you did partially. I think I still have a question on, and I can take that up with other people in the project about how when someone says, yeah, was it $1.90 or whatever, how do you know? Am I just like...
Or the documentation, I saw, sorry, I forgot to answer that. if you remember the conversation, I documented that these guys have almost 7 stages of verification. And there's a process of documentation, and there's even an external company that audits this. So I think just like even when you get a scholarship in South Africa or in any other part where you don't have to pay back, you still have to provide proof of income, whether it's your mom's payslip or bank statements and things like that. And I think LEAP does that. And we can verify that, but I think that's what I heard. So they would know that your income levels you are earning 300,000, and that's acceptable for example, in the context, and you are relatively poor. If you're earning, for example, most scholarships in South Africa, they've got that 300,000 mark. And if you're earning 300,000 with kids, you are technically poor, so you qualify for a scholarship versus someone who earns 400,000 and above, then you don't qualify because So I think I heard them saying that. I might have missed it, but we can verify if I'm not sure, Allan. But I think I was surprised that is one thing they do well, which goes back to what we call validation or due diligence. It's due diligence. Because I think you get the forms, they interview you, you send the documents, they interview you, then they take your data to an external organization that they pay to verify that your results and income, which was the main thing, was the educational results and income. But I don't know if I had that well, Allan.
Yeah, they do multiple steps of verification. Even they basically use your ID number and phone number, and they run through some government database to get more financial information from those databases. So they really do the due diligence through a partnering organization.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting is when there's outcome data to who renews is going to be very interesting, because who renews will show whether people actually need it or not. And I guess I'm saying this with the vantage point of having done some research in Kenya and some focus groups and also seeing some of the reporting is that the renewal rates drop significantly. And so that is, for me, that's a signal that either things weren't verified well, or for one other reason, you're not as needy as you say you are. Or maybe interest rates went up, or I don't know.
Or is it based on grades? Because these loan schemes are fascinatingly very based on how you perform. So if you don't perform well the previous year, you don't get even though you're still needy. That would be quite interesting to know what goes into
the way I saw it written in their reports was like, we were expecting, for example, let's hypothetically say we were expecting 120 renewals, we got 12. What happened? And then they detail that they're following up with individuals as to why they didn't renew. So to me, it says that all other conditions were met, and then they were really banking on that, on the interest, and then what happened.
That could be quite interesting, because could it mean that they get other scholarships, bursaries that are not loans? Surely it can't be that the economic conditions have suddenly changed drastically. Or as you say,
exactly,
some loopholes in selection. But to me, I must say I was quite not surprised, because that's what financial institutions do very well. But it was still alarming that LEAP does it nevertheless, how stringent their due diligence process. So I doubt it's errors in selection, but it's a mystery. It's a good question we need to figure out. Anyways, I know we're over time, Wendy.
That's all good, thanks. So I think for those who are watching the recording, watch the space from a publication perspective, and we'll also make sure we communicate any publications that we do put out. And I think what this also does is, as you say, Phumlani, this is a study, and it's almost a study in itself, but it also raises some other questions, and we need to ask, well, why is this happening? Why are there these sort of perhaps unintended selection biases that have crept into the system? And that's something that our team is also looking at as we look for another 2.5 or 3 years, we look into this particular study. So we'll be sharing some more information about the study as well. Thanks especially to Jill for joining. Siki joined us a little bit earlier, and Eric also joined us a little bit earlier. And for any further information on this, especially for those perhaps watching the recording of this, please feel free to reach out to the Bertha Centre. You'll find our details on our website, or reach out to us via LinkedIn, and we'll be able to connect with you. So thanks to everyone. Thank you especially to Phumlani and to Allan for sharing with us today. We really appreciate the elegance in which you communicated those insights. Again, not always the happiest of news, but news that is now documented, and something that hopefully will spur us into action to do something about. So for those who are South African, happy Heritage Day for Sunday. Have a very, very good long weekend, and we hope to engage with you soon. Thanks, everyone.